The work of the kingdom is not always accomplished by great or grand size, prominence, triumphalism. And it's not always accomplished even by economic sustainability. The kingdom of God is accomplished by God's love. It is evidenced by abundance and blessing that comes out of little or nothing. You caught nothing? I'll show you. Put out into the deep water. This congregation has heard of blessings in my sermon series these past 2 weeks, but now the charge is in order. Go forth. Trust. Hear Christ's call. Heed Christ's call. Okay, I hope I can count on forgiveness for monumentally mixing metaphors today. It's Pentecost, and as we worship, we have reminders of the tongues of fire as our focus under the Lord's table. But we didn't read the passages about the tongues of fire. And despite the mixed metaphor, we've been talking about deep water on flame-ridden Pentecost. It's not completely coincidental. There is potential in deep water. So much that we've read about this month in the news, and so much that we consider as we hear Christ's call and lead this beloved church home. The association Christians always make with water, rightly, is baptism. But this water cannot extinguish the flames of Pentecost, just as the flames that rose from the burning bush on Mount Sinai as Moses spoke there with God could not consume the bush. The extreme language of flames and end times and deep water and commissioning for future disciple making is appropriate, all of it for today. How do we take in the promise that rings like these handbells back and forth to our time from the end time, the eschaton, of which we have read in the Revelation? There's a wonderful story. I've heard several different versions of it. And I'll share the one that I believe I've read in Michael Lindvall's writing about how he was sitting in on a class for confirmation class in his church. And the associate pastor was leading the class. And the associate pastor was talking about the past of the church, the brick Presbyterian church in New York City. And he was exaggerating everything. Everything was exaggerated about how fantastic, how powerful, how wonderful all the people were, how great the throngs were who came to worship, how wonderful everything was about the church. And after the class, Lindvall spoke to the associate and he said, "Don't you think you exaggerated a little bit too much?" And I thought of this again when we listened to the wonderful story of Central Presbyterian Church yesterday. All the good that's come in 116 years of mission and ministry. The associate pastor said to Lindvall, "Well, maybe I stretched it a little bit, but I thought it was important for them to see things viewed from the end time, the eschaton." He wanted them to see, looking back from the end of time and the fulfillment of all things. When Christ met those rude disciples and called them, his call was completely unrelated to their poor qualifications. And when he calls us, it's unrelated to our accomplishments, but also unrelated to our failures. For the first disciples, God's call did not come in a holy place. It came in their workplace, and that was where he met them. Not that God doesn't call people in holy places like this, but the important lesson is that God's kingdom always reaches deep into every arena of human life. Every arena. Everyone. There are always surprises that come with doing God's work. I have relished preparing Pentecost services in the years past because of the surprises that I enjoy building into the liturgy. An old friend of mine from Arkansas told me about a Pentecost service that he prepared when he was young. His first church was in Austin, and he had graduated from the seminary there, and so he had several of the professors in his congregation. He said on Pentecost, one of the tricks that he decided to do was to have some handheld dramatic explosives, actual explosives that would go off from his hands when he would drop them. And so as part of the reading of the tongues of flame and the wind, he discharged these explosives. Only I guess the professors who were in his congregation weren't as forbearing and as kind as the many clergy who are in our congregation. Because one of the professors held his hand over his face and lowered his head when the man I have 4 times previously been called away from churches, leaving congregations behind. But surprise, this is the first time my entire congregation has been called away from me. I suppose it is good for a minister to see what it's like, life on the other side. The surprise for me, like unto being told at the end of a long night of fishing, to put out into the deep, is that God has some other disciple-making use for me, just as there is another use for you.